On April 4, 1975, a US military cargo plane took off from South Vietnam. Its mission was to transport hundreds of Vietnamese orphans to the United States. Not long after takeoff, the plane malfunctioned and was forced to land in a paddy field of rice. Welcome back to Curiosity, and today we're talking about the story of Operation Babylift. How many children made it out? How many people died in the initial plane crash? Was there actually an American businessman who assisted in the operation? We're talking about all that and more, so stay tuned. By April 1975, the Vietnam War was coming to a close. The conflict was absolutely devastating. Over the course of about 10 years, the war claimed millions of lives, including over 2 million civilians, both north and south. Outside of losing close to 60,000 themselves, the United States was going through its own issues, both in Vietnam and back home. By March of '75, the city of Da Nang had fallen to the North Vietnamese. The next and final stop before victory was Saigon. By the 3rd of April, the Viet Cong were attacking the city and the US Army was pulling out. In order to rescue as many people as possible, President Gerald Ford announced that the military would be evacuating South Vietnamese orphans from the country. The US military planned 30 flights in and out of Vietnam, with cargo aircraft flown by the United States Air Force. This was all under the command of Major General Howard J. Nash. Several adoption agencies from around the world, including Holt International, petitioned to have various orphanages around Vietnam evacuated. Between April 3rd and 26th, the United States evacuated over 2,500 Vietnamese. Not only did they end up in the US, but also Canada, Australia, France, and West Germany. But it wasn't all that simple. Remember, during the evacuation, Saigon was under attack by the North Vietnamese. Both US soldiers and South Vietnamese held their defenses as long as they could, but it was no match for enemy fire. What made matters worse was the fact that they had a limited aircraft. The military also had to move US soldiers out of this hostile territory, which took up many of their resources. Things were going to fall apart sooner or later, and time was running out. Eventually, planes were under such heavy fire from North Vietnamese artillery, flights were unable to leave safely. The United States needed all the help it could get. This is where an American businessman by the name of Robert Macaulay comes in. Robert heard about the military's attempts to evacuate young kids. To assist with their efforts, he chartered a Boeing 747 airplane and arranged for 300 orphans to be taken out of the country. This wasn't an easy task, even for a man of Macaulay's stature. It turns out he was forced to mortgage his home in order to pay all the expenses. A well-known American physician named Frederick Skip Burkle Jr. escorted many of the children from Saigon all the way to an airfield in the Philippines. It was here they boarded the Boeing 747 and made their way to the USA. Unfortunately, not every flight was as lucky. At the beginning of the mission, flights leaving Saigon came out of Tan Son Nhut Airport. On April 4, 1975, during the second day of Operation Babylift, a C-5A Galaxy took off from the airport around 4 p.m. This was the first flight of the mission, so pressure was high. There were over 300 passengers aboard the plane. According to reports, most of the children on the flight were aged 2 and under. One account claims that some of the kids were so small they had to be carried onto the plane. According to Regina Owen, first lieutenant in the Air Force during the operation, children were loaded 2 to a seat. Since there wasn't room for everyone, those who couldn't fit had to be placed in the cargo compartment. For the children in the cargo, they had to be secured by any means necessary. They even used tie-down straps to keep them from bumping around during the flight. On top of that, they were also given pillows to provide cushioning. About 12 minutes after takeoff, the plane's lower left fuselage came apart from an explosion. From here, the plane quickly began to descend. At one point, the plane's cargo doors blew out. This carried away a massive chunk of the tail. Since the plane was now unable to land properly, the pilot had to think fast. Captain Dennis Bud Traynor was able to stabilize the plane and turn it around towards Vietnam. But no matter how hard he pulled, the nose kept going further down. In the end, Traynor had no choice but to crash the aircraft in a rice paddy outside of the city. As bad as this sounds, it was the only way the passengers had a chance of survival. Needless to say, the crash was devastating. Several more parts broke off during impact. The crash was so intense the plane even became airborne for another half a mile before hitting a large dike and coming to a stop. The wreckage was in flames. Bud Traynor survived the impact, only barely. The second the plane crashed, he knew that he had to get out of the wreckage ASAP. The problem was he was upside down. Once he undid his seatbelt, he fell to the ceiling, managing to crawl to the window and roll it down. When he stepped out, he saw the wings burning. The death toll was just too much to bear. Out of the 314 passengers, 138 people died. This included 78 children. Out of the 176 survivors, most suffered terrible injuries. After the crash, an investigation was carried out. Like with any other plane crash, officials had to look into exactly what happened with the flight. Since many of the pieces were stolen by looters, investigators had a much harder time reaching a conclusion. The US Air Force reportedly offered a bounty for any plane pieces that was recovered and brought back to them. At first, they figured that someone had sabotaged the plane, but upon further investigation, it was found that the plane's doors were likely the cause. The doors, which had blown off before the impact, were found in the South China Sea. Records showed that while the plane was being built, the doors were improperly fitted. As a result, they were unable to lock properly. Safety inspectors missed the locks and cleared the plane to fly. As the plane ascended, the pressure got higher also, and the doors were unable to handle the load. History is full of fascinating stories. Care to learn more? Let's keep your curiosity going with a couple more videos, shall we? Here's what you need to know. Check out the story of the greatest imposter in the world. Or how about how Hitler's nephew worked against him? Go ahead, click one, or better yet, watch both, and learn more about crazy stories throughout history. Which unbelievable rescue story would you want us to cover next? Let us know in the comments below.